Thanks for bearing with me through my technical difficulties. I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to hear me? Sweet. Yeah, so I'm Dana Scheider. I'm a senior engineer at Envato. Present is the button I'm looking for. There we go. Sorry about that. So anyway, I'm here to talk to you about technical writing. I'm hoping that by the end of this talk, you'll understand why technical writing is an important skill for developers and engineers to have, as well as some of the steps that you can take to improve your own technical writing and improve the general quality of technical writing in your organization. So the target audience for this talk is developers and engineers. So if you're not a developer or engineer, your mileage may vary, but I am hoping that this topic will be illuminating for those of you in my target audience. So technical writing, like any form of writing, is a type of communication. There are a lot of different components to communication, but I wanted to go over the basics before I continued with the talk. So the first kind of component of communication is the transfer of information from a sender to a recipient via a medium. So, like, for example, right now, I'm the sender of this talk. The medium is video conferencing and a screen shared slides, and the recipients are you. So, you know, in order for communication to work well, we want it to be as easy and effective and as clear as possible. And how easy and effective it is can be affected by a lot of factors, including language, subculture and culture, demographic factors, socioeconomic factors, assumptions participants are making about each other, as well as the emotional state and other personal factors of the people participating. And additionally, it can depend on the medium. So by now, most of us are familiar with the fact that communicating sarcasm over text messages is difficult compared to face-to-face. And this is what I'm talking about here, that different media allow you to take different signals from the sender and kind of process them. In a face-to-face context, you would be able to see someone's facial expressions, someone's behavior. In a voice call, maybe you couldn't see those things. So it's important to choose the right medium. Here we're going to be talking about written media, of course, and these could be a lot of things. So I'll get into that in a minute. For now, as far as the definition of technical writing, for the purpose of this talk, I just find technical writing to mean writing that describes or informs about complex technical topics. And I want to be clear here that when I say complex technical topics, I mean any topic that your audience will find complex and technical. One of the things that I really want to emphasize here is that writing needs to be for its audience, and writing that doesn't take its audience correctly into account is faulty. So it's important to think about whether your readers will find the writing complex and technical, because you could be doing technical writing without even realizing it, if not. Technical writing is a kind of writing and not a kind of document. So technical documents, you know, RFCs or pull requests or those kind of things, API docs, those are the kinds of documents we think of when we think of technical writing. But technical writing can be present in any kind of writing, including this slideshow, blog posts, YouTube videos. Like, well, those aren't writing, but the writing of the video is. So still, are you writing about a complex technical topic, or will your readers find the topic complex and technical, is the question that you're asking. So there are a number of examples of technical writing, and this is totally a non-exhaustive list. So documentation is one example, ranging from READMEs to quick start guides and tutorials to API docs and documentation for developers or contributors. Pull request descriptions and comments, RFCs, any kind of writing in Jira tickets or Trello cards or issue reports to describe a technical problem that's being solved, architectural decision records, technical books or articles or blog posts. And I also want to draw attention to this last one, the commit messages and code comments, because even with those really short form types of writing, it's, if anything, even more important to be able to express yourself clearly and concisely in a way that the reader will understand what's going on. So why is technical writing important? The answer is that we can't do our work without clear, concise, detailed, and unambiguous technical communication in writing. It's essential. We've all had the experience of needing documentation for something that we couldn't find and spending hours scouring source code trying to figure out how something worked. And it really gets in the way. You can waste hours that way. And so it's really important to make sure that for the things that we're supposed to be documenting and the things that we need to be communicating about, that we're actually doing that communication in a clear, concise, detailed, and unambiguous way. Technical writing is a skill we don't teach to engineers, and that's a big part of why I'm here today. It's just something that we kind of expect people to magically know, but that's not realistic. No kind of writing is. In fact, when I was in my senior year of college, I was in a class full of people working on a capstone project, and each person had to contribute one of the sections of the project, and I was responsible for collecting them. I was writing for a magazine at the time, so I was a logical choice for that. And of all of the graduating seniors that turned in their sections, not one of them was publication ready. So it's a skill we don't really teach to anyone, but especially engineering, it's not considered central to the discipline, and I'd like to see that change. So what are some qualities of good technical writing? Good technical writing gives context. So anything that a reader might not understand, you want to make sure that you're including that information or including links where people can get that information. One of the things that involves, and I'll cover this at a number of points in this talk, assumptions about readers' background or prior knowledge need to be validated before you can be sure that you're giving the correct context. It's difficult, especially when you're writing for a large audience of people, to make sure that you've covered all your bases in terms of making sure that everyone kind of understands the background information or the key information they need to know to proceed. Another quality of good technical writing is detail. And detail is a tough one because you want to contain enough detail, but you don't want to overwhelm or confuse readers with irrelevant detail. So this is a really important one to think about. Like, as you're writing, you want to think about, at this point, what questions would a reader be asking? And then answer those questions in your writing. You want to provide all information readers need to do what they need to do next. And I'll talk about that more in a minute as well. Clarity. Clarity is really important in all writing, but especially technical writing, given that technical topics can be anything but clear. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the organization of your documents, that concepts or ideas are presented in a logical order so that the things that a person needs to know first are covered first, and then the things that they need that information to understand come later. So you want to use language as unambiguously as possible, avoid overloaded terms that may have multiple definitions, And you want the document to be formatted in a logical and easy to follow way. So in the case of online communications, that usually means frequent paragraph breaks, breaking things into bulleted lists if you can, anything that makes it easy for the eye to follow and easy to kind of understand the structure of the document. Finally, good technical writing is concise. Things are complicated enough without using more words than you have to express each idea or concept. And so you want to make sure to be really careful to include enough detail that people can understand what you're saying, but not so much that people are wondering why you're telling them this or feeling like they're missing something. So all of this said, the goal of technical writing that I propose is to efficiently communicate to readers the information they need to do whatever they do next. And there's 3 components to this. The first component is communicating to readers. In order to do that, you need to understand your audience. So who is your audience? And you want to be as specific as possible. Anyone who might have read or might be reading your work. So it could be specific individuals, it could be other people on your team, it could be specific professional or educational backgrounds. This RFC is looking for comments from, this, that, and the other type of person. The amount of experience people have in their roles, any demographic or cultural factors, and also, it's important to look at how homogeneous your audience is, because the more homogeneous your audience is, the easier it's going to be to target your writing. Because if, in the most simple sense, if you're writing for, say, only one person, then all you need to know is how that person thinks and how that person will understand the context and stuff. But when you have different people who have different backgrounds and different amounts of background information on the topic, it's important to be a little more strategic about that. And it's important to also, as you are consciously evaluating who your audience is, it's important to ask yourself if you've really thought of everybody. There are a number of people that tend to get forgotten in technical writing, including junior engineers, engineers with a different skill set from the writer. So like, I'm primarily a back-end engineer, but my audience for some of my writing could include front-end engineers, it could include ops people. It just depends on what the writing is. And so it's important to ask yourself if this person is at a level in their career where they can understand certain concepts, and if they're up to speed on the specific stuff you're writing to where they can follow. Developers checking Git history to solve problems in the future is a major underserved group as well. For things like commit messages and pull requests, it's really vital to think ahead to how is somebody going to feel when they're Git blaming this in 5 years, wondering what this bug is about, and all they see is your commit message that says whoops. So thinking of people like that is really important, as well as product managers and business stakeholders. The next component is the information that the readers need. So the first step to knowing what information that they need is to identify what they already know. That in turn is dependent on knowing who the readers are. So what they already know is highly likely to be different for different readers. It's likely to be different for different types of documents. And it's also important to validate that the reader knows something. You might consider single table inheritance a basic term that anyone would understand, for instance, but a more junior engineer might not understand that. So it's easy to assume that people know what you know, but if they did, then you wouldn't be writing this document, right? So it's important to really validate that stuff. And once you've identified what they already know, then you can identify the gaps between what they already know and the knowledge that you want them to have once they've read the document. It's also important to get feedback on those assumptions, especially when you're dealing with moderately technical readers. For example, when I write for our SEO team, I'm frequently surprised either by how much they do know or how much they don't know. It's just not always obvious what specific technical stuff someone will understand or not. And then the final component is what that person needs to do next and setting them up to do the thing they need to do next. Every reader has a reason why they're reading your writing. Every reader has some kind of next steps that they're going to be taking after reading it, whether that's reviewing your PR, using a class or method from your library and their code, verifying that a product meets specifications, writing a client for your API, all kinds of different things. But you want to really have an idea of what is somebody doing when they read this writing, and because that'll tell you more information about what they need to know and whether your writing gives them the information they need to take those steps. Time and empathy for readers are the key missing components in a lot of technical writing, and a lot of writing in general. Good writing takes time. It takes a long time. And it also is not easy. You know, people will often give me writing projects because I'm good at it. And the fact is, I hate writing. It's extremely time consuming. It makes my brain hurt. But it is really important to put in that time because it lessens the pain for everybody when good writing is available. So one important thing you can do is learn to recognize and fix anti-patterns before putting your writing in front of readers. So here are a few examples. Ambiguous or unclear language, such as overloaded terminology or acronyms, like I mentioned earlier. Not everyone knows what a TLD is. When you're talking about an API, are you talking about an interface between components of an application, or are you talking about a web service? You know, there are certain things like that that just aren't necessarily clear. And it's important to make sure to clarify them. You know, I recommend including glossaries and things like that to make it explicit how you'll be using a term in the document if there's any ambiguity there. Implicit assumptions about readers' knowledge base is another one. So it's impossible to not make assumptions about readers' knowledge base. You just want to be as conscious of what those are as possible and, you know, do as much as you can to validate that they're accurate. Another one is missing background information or context. So background information could include links to other documents before this one, links to Trello cards or Jira tickets with background information, links to relevant pull requests or release notes, any details of what prompted a change to be made or what problem it solves. And then, yeah, glossaries. Glossaries are really important. Another one is missing details. So this is another thing about striking that balance between enough detail and too much. It is important to make sure that you're covering how your software is interacting with other tools or systems, the type and structures of parameters and output values when you're documenting a library. That's one of my pet peeves. And excessive detail, yeah, is also a potential problem. And that depends on who you're writing for and what you're writing. Generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're writing API docs, you want to include minimal to no references to internals. Ideally, you don't want your users to care how your stuff works. They just should know how to use it. So it's a good practice to ask yourself if anyone is likely to wonder why you're including the information, and then you can either include an explanation of that or you can remove the information if you determine that maybe you're not including it for a very good reason. So writing is a process. There's a whole process involved in writing. It's not just a product. So before writing, I recommend doing pre-writing work in a notebook or Google Doc, kind of reflecting on why you're writing your piece and for whom. Pre-writing work can assume validating assumptions you've made about your readers, and that can be as simple as asking a person, like, "Hey, Joe, do you know what JSON is?" That kind of thing can be really useful to validate those assumptions. You want to figure out what your readers are going to want to do after they read your writing, and then create an outline with some points that you want to cover. And once you've done that, then you can brainstorm questions readers might ask about the information and kind of incorporate the answers to those questions into your outline. The next step is writing a draft. A draft is not your final project or final product. I avoid putting my drafts in the same place my final product will be. So it's good to open another document and then copy and paste when you're done. Otherwise, you're at risk of just publishing something that's partially finished. So you want to collect and organize the things that you generated in the pre-writing phase, such as the outline. You want to flesh out the outline, and it may become an expanded outline before it becomes a draft. That happens especially with longer writing. You can move or add or remove sections. The important thing at this stage is that you want to get your ideas on paper. You're more interested in actually getting the information down than you are about spelling or grammar or conventions or anything like that. Once you've finished the draft, then you can revise it. I recommend rereading the draft in its entirety at least once. And as you do, make notes. Notice what you see that is not quite right. Ask yourself if this is in a useful form for readers. Is it flowing in a logical way? Maybe this section needs to be up here. And also just asking yourself what you're choosing to leave out. There's always something that we choose to omit, and so it's important to be intentional about that as well. Even at this stage, don't worry too much about spelling, grammar, or punctuation. It's still about ideas and, at this point, form. Once you've done that phase, then you can move on to finishing touches. Again, anytime you make any changes, I recommend reading the piece as a whole after those changes before you publish. And yeah, you want to check for context, detail, clarity, and conciseness, like I mentioned earlier. This is the time when you'll make changes to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation, as well as any changes to structure or format to make it more readable or easier to follow. It's good to ask for feedback, especially on longer or more detailed pieces of writing. Hopefully you can get that feedback from people who are similar to your readers. And once you're done with that, you can copy and paste it into where the final place is it needs to go. Longer or more complex pieces are always going to require more attention to the writing process. You're not necessarily going to do a whole pre-writing phase every time you write a commit message, but for longer pieces, it's really useful, especially for documentation. It's really useful to kind of go through this process. So to recap, technical writing is any writing that describes or informs about complex technical topics, which are complex and technical from the reader's perspective. Examples range from books to RFCs to code comments. One of the critical things about writing that I want you to take away from this is how important it is to know your readers and what information you're conveying to them and why. And finally, adhering to an organized writing process, starting with audience analysis, will make your writing more effective. And yeah, that's it. So thank you for watching. I'm happy to continue the conversation. I've got my email and Twitter handle on here for you in case you want to get in touch with me. And yeah, are there questions? Or do we have time for questions?
Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Thank you so much for talking about this topic that nobody thinks about much. Uh, I do have a question. This was very useful information, but I was wondering how you got to this point, this realization for the importance of documentation, as well as, a need to talk about it, as well as like, did you face any resistance about this from your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as the last part, resistance, no. Finding the political will to make major changes to improve in this area is a different thing. So, as far as how I got to this position, my mother is a writer editor, and even when I was a little kid, when I would hand her school assignments to look over, they would come back full of marks, just like tons of requests for changes. And so like I really got used to seeing editing that way as a time to make major changes. And later on in life, I also wrote for a magazine for a while before I was a developer. And so writing has always been something that I've been interested in and good at, even if I don't always enjoy it. But in technical writing, once I started in tech, it became a pain point. Anytime I'm trying to get something set up on my dev machine and, oh, nobody wrote this in the README, or, any kind of situation like that, reading API docs or whatever, it's like, oh, wow, a lot of these docs are actually really terrible. And it's no wonder that they're terrible, because we expect engineers to write them and yet don't train them how to write.
So true. Actually, I want to expand my question. This is like my pet peeve issue with documentation. Like we can document, but like keeping it all up to dated and getting rid of document which is not relevant anymore is like so difficult, because by the time you go to that document, things have changed.
Yeah,
Especially if you're pointing to code, it's a
it's
living thing. It changes.
it's
So
really hard. And the way that I've handled that is oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's 4:30 a.m. here, or 5 a.m. here. Sorry. But I
my
got
question
distracted.
was around how code keeps changing, so the document needs to be
Right.
updated all the time.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that we've done is we've implemented a campsite rule where you always leave things better than you found them. And so people, if in the course of your work you notice different things that are wrong with the docs, then you can change them at that point. And then the other thing is having a clear centralized location where docs are, or like a clear rule as to where docs can be found, because it can be hard to really audit them or anything if they're just lying around in various places.
So true. So true. Yeah. No, you have some people are loving your talk. Cal and Christine
Oh,
also have
thank
loved
you.
it and have great comments for you. Uh, we are at 2 o'clock. If we have any other questions, please feel free to put it on chat. Um, yeah, we'll hang around for another minute. We'll see if
Sounds
there are any
good.
questions. Uh, Yes, Christina, that's very true. It's such a relevant topic after that. I was super excited for your session today, Dana, because I
Oh,
feel like personally I struggle, but like, how do you learn it? Like, there are people who do it really well, and I will usually write my document and send it to them for a review. Uh, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and it's one of those things where they really don't teach it, and so a lot of the time it's not like something you can even get mentorship for, because nobody taught the seniors either.
Yeah, so true. And also, like, I feel like we do get to do some, diagrams and stuff, lucid charts and all that in undergrad and grad courses, but documentation, not so much. Yeah.
No, it's so important. I mean, like, how much easier is life when you can find the docs that you need, and they give you the information that you're looking for. I mean, it's honestly really surprising to me how many bad docs there are out there, especially given, at least I don't know anyone else's team, but on my team, we consider documentation when we decide what tools to adopt.
So true, so true. Thank you so much, Dana. We have ran 2 minutes over our time, but I really think you should go ahead and write a book about this. Maybe people will start reading more about it.
Yeah, I think I will. Well,
Yeah,
thank
you
you.
should.
Thank you.
Oh, we do have a question if you don't mind hanging out. Christine is asking, do you have examples you can point to in GitHub of really nice documentation you have seen?
Oh, that's a good question. And the answer is, unfortunately, not really. I have a couple of public repos that have documentation in them, but they're not anything that's like interesting to people necessarily. But to tell you the truth, it's rare. Like, really good documentation is pretty rare.
I guess Christine here is giving us a very good idea. Maybe before your book, you should have like a sample documentation example for best.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
She's saying even if there are they are not interesting, it might help to have the example for us.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
cool. Yeah.
You have your email and Twitter handle. So
Yeah.
Christine, why don't you follow her in Twitter? And Dana, can you please publish, like, put something for us this week or soonish?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dana,
Thank you.
and everybody for joining us. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.